That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Hold Your Breath, the directorial debut of Karrie, Crouse, and William Joines, which premiered at the 2024 Toronto International Film Festival. It will be available to stream on Hulu, courtesy of Searchlight Pictures, on October 3rd, 2024.
Directorial debut. What is Hold Your Breath about? In 1930s Oklahoma, amid the region's horrific dust storms, a woman is convinced that a sinister presence is threatening her family. What is your pull quote?
There's a sense of tangible tragedy missing in Hold Your Breath, exploring familiar themes of women and madness, but lacking the insidious disposition of a merciless world, which should properly define its cautiously hopeful ending as ambiguously unresolved.
Mine. Hold Your Breath works best when focusing on one woman's grief and paranoia. Unfortunately, it's diluted by a script that seems to be throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks.
Yes, I agree.
There's a lot going on, although at the center, there's some really strong performances from Sarah Paulson.
Which is to be expected. She's usually pretty good.
And the two actors playing her daughters.
Alona Jane Robbins as Ollie and Amiah Miller as Rose.
So I'm going to tell a very simple version of the story because there is a lot going on, which we'll get to. But basically, 1930s Oklahoma. It reminds me of wherever Dorothy is from in The Wizard of Oz.
Well, she's from Kansas.
I know, but like the environment, like kind of in the plains, it's super dusty and barren.
Yeah, it's very the Little House on the Scary.
Everything is some version of tan, including the people. But so Sarah Paulson lives in this little house with her two daughters. One's a teenager and one's younger. And we understand the dad is gone for work.
He's building a bridge.
So she has a friend. Sarah Paulson has a friend.
Esther, played by Annaleigh Ashford. So we have two Ryan Murphy ladies leading this movie.
Because we know Annaleigh from the assassination of Gianni Versace. She played Andrew Cunanan's
little buddy.
Good Judy.
And then she also played Paula Jones for Mr. Murphy.
So we see that Esther's, one of her kids is sick. And it's made clear pretty quickly that Sarah Paulson's character is very concerned about like the dust, and maybe she thinks that's what's making people sick, and she's concerned about being clean versus her friend Esther, who doesn't try to sweep or clean anything. But basically, the story sort of evolves into Sarah Paulson becoming very paranoid about what might be outside. Because there's this component of like a drifter, this mysterious like preacher man. There's this fictitious character called the Gray Man. But we learn that really it's just her paranoia is being fed by a sleep disorder of some sort, because we understand she sleepwalks and then she has medication to help her sleep. And also the grief she feels, because while she lives with her two daughters, there's one kid who died.
Ada.
So in the end...
Scarlet fever, and which also made the youngest one, I believe...
she's either deaf or mute.
She has loss of hearing, yeah.
So in the end, Sarah Paulson's character thinks the best way to resolve all this is to have her and her two daughters join their dead daughter. So she wants them all to die by eating, like overdosing on sleeping pills.
Very Michael Haneke.
But the oldest daughter doesn't want to do that. So it's also explained that because of these like dust storms that are so severe, that like if they go outside, they would get lost. Which reminds me of the movie you reviewed, Never Let Go.
Yes, Halle Berry.
They have these ropes tied to the house to help them navigate outside and make their way back.
But it also made me think that movie, directed by Alexander Aja, also has a mother whose disorder is basically infecting the house. And the thing with the Gray Man, which is from a short story they're reading in Hold Your Breath, is very much also like Never Let Go. Like, if this gets inside me, I'm going to do crazy things.
So right as the mother is going to have her and her daughters eat this, these suicide peaches, the oldest daughter says, wait, I think someone's outside. Can you go check? Sarah Paulson goes outside in this like massive dust storm, and of course is attached to the rope, and the older daughter detaches the rope. So then Sarah Paulson's character, I guess, gets lost outside and overcome with the dust, and we see her die, presumably.
Presumably.
And then the final shot is a memory of hers that we've seen like 3 times prior when all of her children were alive. Because the older kids keep asking, can you tell the story about the wheat? And it's a fond memory of a beautiful sunny day when all of them are running in the wheat fields.
Very Willa Cather.
So that's her final memory, the end.
Yes, but then the girls are on a train.
And then we see the girls are on a train, presumably to go visit their dad.
And my pull quote was suggesting that I think this would have been a stronger film if we're left feeling in that moment that these girls are still doomed, even though they're leaving the rural madness for the city.
Because
the world is not outfitted to support women.
Well, I think, so first of all, a movie about like dust, it doesn't feel gritty enough to me. It's a little too glossy.
Yeah, it did feel like it's trying to do like Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, but in the Dust Bowl.
But I think the main thing that put me off is there's just so much going on. Because at first you think, oh, why is the dad gone? Because the mom is being a little ambiguous about, because the kids are asking, how come dad hasn't written us? So then as the audience is like, well, maybe he's not off working. But then we learned that it is true. He was off working. And we know this because a mysterious man shows up.
Mm-hmm. Wallace Grady, played by Ebon Moss-Bachrach.
And his introduction is peculiar because prior to that, we have been reading about the Gray Man. And we're told the Gray Man is this like sort of evil entity that travels but can like get into homes because it can break apart into dust and seep its way in, which obviously is a scary story for kids who live in a very dusty place.
An X-Men prototype.
So this man shows up, but then we're also told, because Sarah Paulson likes to do needle stitch with like a group of ladies for leisure, and there's this older woman who was gossipy as hell, and she's like, oh, did y'all hear about so-and-so? This drifter like broke into their home and like killed the family.
Very in cold blood, yes.
So then we have like this idea of a drifter running around, plus we have the Gray Man, then we have this bishop who shows up in...
Bishop?
Or what's his name? Doesn't he say my name is Bishop Grady? Or
Grady.
He says Bishop Wallace or something.
Brother.
Oh, he says Brother Wallace.
Bishop?
I don't know. Well, he's pretending to be like a religious man, and he says that he can lay hands and heal people. So he shows up one day sleeping in their shed, and he's being real sneaky, like he doesn't want to be caught. And Sarah Paulson is proficient with a shotgun, so she goes out there, holds him at gunpoint. He explains, no, I'm not a bad guy.
I know your husband, I know your children's names. It's very Dan Stevens in The Guest.
Well, and then what really alarms Sarah Paulson is that man is wearing her husband's jacket. And he's like, oh, your husband gave me this jacket and told me I should come visit you and help you out. Like, okay.
No.
But while all of this is happening and he's being held at gunpoint, the oldest daughter develops a nosebleed.
Of course. It is dry.
It is dry. And the man says, oh, I can heal her. Let me prove to you. And so he lays hands on her, and that gets kind of scary. And then...
But her blood coagulates.
Which is kind of hard to tell because she's covered in blood.
Right. But
then Sarah Paulson feels at ease. And then the man says, I can help you with your cow. Your only source of food is starving to death. I can bring it back to health. And so we see him doing something with hay, and he says that'll proliferate. And then he says, I can bring the rain. Eurythmics. So...
Oh, it was right. How he's standing outside. I mean, to me, he's like a charlatan of the level of Burt Lancaster in The Rainmaker with Katharine Hepburn.
Oh, that's a good reference. I was also thinking, what's the movie where Robert Pattinson shouts delusions?
The devil all the time, yes.
But sure enough, the next morning, Sarah Paulson goes outside and it's raining, and we see Brother Wallace outside praying to the heavens. So that's happening. Then her friend Esther.
Oh, poor Esther.
Poor Esther, because her kids are sick. But then it's also presented like she keeps a nasty house. And then there's this visual effect of the dust in the air that's real heavy-handed.
We're seeing a lot of particles, and it ends up not being very terrifying.
No, so within the first 30 minutes, I really thought like, oh, is this going to be like, what's that Shyamalan movie, The Happening?
There's some Shyamalan-esque elements to it, but it also reminded me of other films like The Burrowers, that pseudo-horror western we watched years ago. And also there's a film starring Caitlin Gerard called The Wind, which is very much about a woman alone in an isolated property, and it's windy outside.
But Esther, one of her kids dies. So, of course, Sarah Paulson lost a child, and that child died like 5-6 years prior. And it seems like she's still grief-stricken, but she's been able to move on. Except that her husband says, I'm moving to go take this job. Why don't you all come with me? And we hear Sarah Paulson saying, like in a flashback, I don't want to put my kids through that, having to sleep in a tent, trying to travel across. And also, I don't want to leave the burial site of my dead child. So she's still very connected to the death of her child, which makes sense. But Esther, at a point, her son dies, one of her kids, from getting sick from this mysterious bug that's flying around. And she becomes unhinged and is seen to be unfit. So her children are taken away from her. But with the advice of, so the sheriff comes with Sarah Paulson, and Sarah Paulson checks in on her and tells the sheriff she's not fit to take care of this kid. So you need, take her other kid away from her. And of course, Esther's mad and screaming at her like, you're going to be like me one day. You're going to turn into me. And that's kind of what happens. But then I was confused because Esther's grief is immediately after the death of her child. But Sarah Paulson's kid died like 5-6 years ago.
Well, hers is exacerbated by this somnambulism that she is experiencing.
Then we see her taking all these pills, and we don't learn until after like the third time we see her taking the pills, when she goes to the doctor, that those were in fact sleeping aids.
But she stops taking them because she wants to keep watch over her children because of the brother Grady.
Right. And then we don't learn until almost the end of the film, because there's a scene, again, there's a dust storm, and the youngest daughter, the one who's deaf or mute, she's saying like the gray man is outside, and the older daughter says, actually, I think she's right because there's someone. And Sarah Paulson goes out there, and you can predict that she's about to shoot someone who she shouldn't, but then we see that it's like like the gray man figure. Sarah Paulson shoots it, and it like disintegrates. But then we find out she actually shot Esther.
Which I called that.
And immediately, like, yeah, she's probably going to shoot Esther, who's going to check on her.
I called that from the first act, that like Esther's not long for this world.
After she shoots Esther, the sheriff shows up trying to check in, and then Sarah Paulson ends up killing the sheriff. I do think the final act, there's a lot going on, and there was tension, and the vibe was more what I wanted.
Sure.
But I think the first hour, there was just too much going on.
Well, part of her paranoia certainly is justified and is the catalyst for her losing her damn mind. But I don't know, I think I was expecting more of the Brother Grady element, because that obviously reminded me of a lot of films, including the recent Coup starring Peter Sarsgaard as this man that shows up pretending to be somebody he is not. And that's always a sinister situation that you can mine for days. But I don't know, it's missing a component that really drives this home.
I agree. And I think we need to pull out like the gray man thing.
Or
because why would because we were first introduced to the idea because it's bedtime, and the older sister is reading the story of the gray man to the younger sister, which would do nothing but give her nightmares, because it's about like a place where there is a lot of dust. And
this is not the book. And that reminded me of terrorizing my sister when we'd have experienced tornado weather, and I'd put on Twisters when she was a child.
Right, yeah. I did think Sarah Paulson put a lot into this role.
She always does, like she did with Run, which is her last film, which I believe was also a Hulu release. But I remember liking that as well.
But it seems like, okay, if you want to get into like delve into a mother's sort of psyche and maybe going into madness, then you think something like The Babadook. This film's not there.
No, it's just a little too simplistic and tangential even.
Then if you're thinking like it might be a ghost story type thing, it's definitely not there, with like the whole gray man aspect. And then like straight up horror, it's not really that gory, bloody. I mean, probably the most, like there's a moment where, because Sarah Paulson's character is kind of out of it, and she likes to needle stitch, and she ends up like stitching her craft onto her hand.
Which is creepy.
Which was kind of a gross scene. There is a creepy scene when clearly she's like starting to go to another place in her mind, but she's also been isolating, like locking the kids in the house. So the community is concerned. So she decides, well, I'll go to some social function. And she makes that decision suddenly. So she's like, well, let's get ready to go, girls. And Sarah Paulson takes a knife, cuts her thigh open to get some blood to put on as blush. Mm-hmm. And I thought, ooh, that was kind of probably, we could have just, I think Sarah Paulson could have pulled this movie off better if it just would have focused on her and her decline.
Her decline, but it's also coming from somewhere that I don't think is just the death of a child that she's never really processed.
And I don't think it's coming from her being paranoid about the gray man. I don't think, because at one point she does seem to think like maybe it is the gray man. Mm-hmm. But at that point, it's like she's already losing it. I think that's it. That we don't get enough backstory to understand why this grief is.
Yeah, like I think we needed something more with it, because we meet the husband briefly. You know, she's saying, I don't want to go be on your bridge journey. But I think that should have been also we should have seen him being kind of anxious about leaving her behind, because it's like, you know how you get when you're alone.
Yeah. But I feel conflicted because I do think the performances are really strong. I really like the teenage daughter and the younger daughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the kids do a pretty good job.
I mean, everyone, the drifter or the Brother Wallace, and even that nosy ass old lady.
And Esther, I think.
Esther too.
Annaleigh does a good job of making this person quite sympathetic, which, you know, adds to the emotional component of what happens to her.
What else would you like to say?
I'd like to say, Mr. Sandman, bring me a dream. Make him the most violent that I've ever seen. But I would give this film 2.5.
Yeah, I think it's okay. I would give it 2.5 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.